Hi, thank you for joining us today for the first Sheep Breeders Roundtable 2021 conference session. In this session, we're going to be talking about back to basics EBVs and genetics and how we can use those in our commercial flocks. I'm Emma Steele and I work in the knowledge exchange team at AHDB. But previous to that, my role was in Cygnet breeding services, so I'm used to talking to farmers about genetics and about figures. I have also got the job of welcoming you to the Sheep Breeders Roundtable 2021 conference. So we're a bit different this year. For those of you that don't know, Sheep Breeders Roundtable happens biannually, so every other year, and is a conference held in person and usually in the Midlands region, and academics, sheep farmers, levy boards, journalists get together in a room for about 2.5 days and talk about all that's happening in the genetics world of the sheep industry. This time last year, we were talking about what we were going to do for 2021, and obviously we didn't know what was happening with COVID at that point, so we've taken the opportunity to go online, which means we can open the conference up to many more people. So this session is a real commercial, simple, back to basics session on figures, and we really hope you get the most out of it and that you enjoy it. I have with me today David Rossiter and Adrian who are both sheep farmers, Dewi Jones from Innovis, Leah Shanks from AHDB, and Carrie-Anne Hall in the background as well, who will be making sure that all the technology is working. So if we see Carrie-Anne, we've got a problem. We don't expect to see Carrie-Anne tonight. Just to introduce the technology then. So this is just how to ask a question. We will be doing questions throughout today. So if you just click on the orange arrow in the top of your screen, like step 1 says, it will extend a box. And within that box near step 2, you can see there's a little questions panel. You can click that and you can type your question there, and that can go to Leah. And Leah will then ask those questions on your behalf, and we'll do that throughout. You will remain muted throughout the session, so that is the only way you're able to contact with us. So as I say, any questions, any problems, any comments, just type them in that question box there, and Leah will get that. And this session will be recorded as well, so you can come back to it at a later date, or you can send it on to a friend, whatever you want to do with it. As a quick running order of what we're going to do, we're going to start talking a little bit about what EBVs are, why they're important to your business. And then we're going to join David Rossiter, who is a performance recording breeder, as well as having his own commercial flock, to talk about how he uses figures within his business. And then we'll talk to Adrian as well about the benefits he's seen of using EBVs in a commercial flock, before we go back to Dewi about the practicalities of finding and using EBVs. So firstly, I just want to check that the system is working. So if you could just type into the box now where you're watching from, and Leah's going to just watch it as it comes in and see where we're all joining from today. Just while that's happening, and just while you're typing that in, just a bit of background to why we're doing this session. As I said, Sheep Breeders Roundtable, we're doing it slightly differently this year, but we recognise within the sheep industry that not as many people are using EBVs as they potentially could, and we want everybody to have the best understanding they can, and not be overwhelmed by the numbers and the figures that they see on a screen or on a piece of paper, and really be able to pull out of it what they need and what's suitable for them. So just to add to that, there is no such thing as a stupid question. So within this webinar, please type in any questions you have, anything you've heard, we'll address it. We want this session to be led by you, so you're going to lead the conversation. And Leah also, when she reads that question out on your behalf, won't be mentioning your name. So we don't know where it's come from. So yeah, there's no such thing as a stupid question, and it's not like other people are going to know it was you anyway. So just type that in there. Leah, where have we got people from, and is it working?
It's working. It's a very exotic conference today. We've got lots of people from Scotland. We've got Surrey, Dorset, Kenilworth, Devon. We've also got Northern Ireland. We've got the Bahamas. I'm not sure if I believe you. We'll see. Wiltshire, Somerset, Monmouthshire, all over.
Brilliant. The main thing is that it's working, which is always good. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Leah. So yeah, keep your questions coming in throughout. That is the main message. So, Dewi, if you would like to join me back on screen.
There we go.
Hello, Dewi, how are you?
Good, thank you. Nice to see so many people. Be nice to be in the Bahamas right now, but there we go. We'll settle for West Wales.
So on that basis then, Dewi, would you like to tell us a bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, of course. I know lots of people been to the Sheep Breeders Roundtable for many, many years. So it's nice to reach out to other people, really, people that don't only go to it possibly today. Yeah, I'm a farmer's son from the Llyn Peninsula up in North Wales. Studied in Aberystwyth, went over, studied in New Zealand, ended up coming back to Wales, worked in sheep research for 10 years and set up a commercial business back in 2002. Since then, spent a lot of time trying to develop sheep that are fit for purpose for the industry, working very closely with AHDB, HCC, QMS, and I run a company which I started called Innovis, which some of you will know, and we breed a sort of a toolkit of rams available to people, and everything is very much selected on their ability to perform and our ability to predict how they'll perform. So we're going to talk mainly today about, I think, the industry in general, because there's lots of breeders out there doing a great job with performance recording. But I think what I want to try and get across is that this is a very useful tool that should be fundamental to commercial flocks, and hopefully we can show you that today.
Brilliant. So if you just kick us off then, Dewi, let's start right at the beginning. So what is an EBV? What's it stand for and what's it mean?
Sure. So I suppose let's take a step back. We've just been through all the autumn sales. People have bought lots of sheep, females and males. And what we're trying to do, all of us that are recording, is trying to predict how that sheep is going to breed. And really that's the main difference from seeing a sheep that's turned out well or badly and liking it or not based on its look. It's actually putting another layer of that to say, actually, I'm going to have a pretty good idea because of how he's been recorded, how he's actually going to produce. What are his progeny, be they fat lambs or breeding females, how they're going to perform. And that's the fundamental difference. And to be able to do that, we need to capture data, which isn't straightforward because sheep and sheep farms aren't a straightforward place. So we need to capture the performance data on the farm. So we need to measure that animal, how he or she performs, how they're born, how they're then growing, how they're reared, and then how they grow to a certain weight. And then we can scan them using ultrasound to actually try and predict what's within the body. And we do that on the lumbar, on the back of the sheep, looking at the chop pretty much. And that gives us a pretty good predictor, about 64–65% accuracy on what's within the body of that animal when it comes to meat and fat and bone. And some breeders, ourselves included, will then take that to the next stage and put them through a CT scanner to get some really detailed information. And we mulch that all back in through some very sophisticated software that AHDB provide through Signet, and we do ourselves through Innovis, and we can then generate a breeding values for a sheep on those specific traits. So breeding value really is predicting how that sheep is going to breed for that specific trait. And if we're clever sheep farmers, we work out what traits we need and what our system needs, and we can match the two together.
So just what does the EBV stand for? I can't remember if we said that. Sorry,
yeah, it's an estimated breeding value. So we're estimating how that animal is going to breed, how he's going to pass that trait on. Some other countries call them BVs, breeding values.
Yep.
So if you're in Australia, New Zealand, then they will use them as BVs, and some people will use even things like genomic breeding values that goes into more depth again. But we use EBVs in the UK, and those EBVs give us this ability to predict how well that lamb will grow, how that you will rear the lamb, So there's lots of development all the time in developing these new traits. So it's although the ram breeders and the pedigree breeders use the technology, its ultimate aim is for the commercial farmer. So that if I'm running a commercial flock, let's say I'm lambing my flock in April, and just about putting the tups in now, I need to know that the tups I'm going to use are going to give me the traits I need to deliver my flock objectives. So it starts by understanding what the commercial flock needs to do, and then goes back a step to finding a breeder and rams that's going to deliver that to me then.
So that EBV then, it lets you pull out those specific things that you want and just look at the genetics then, does it?
It does, Emmy, and I don't know if you've got a slide that might help to explain that, but it takes the data of the recording of the lamb. So if you look at this slide here, you've got individual records of the animal there, so how it's been born, how it's been reared, how it's actually, how heavy it was at 8 weeks, how heavy it was at 16, 20 weeks, and what the measurements on the muscle and back fat scanning are. It needs that second piece, which is actually the pedigree. We need to know who's given birth to what, because this can't work without actually understanding the family tree. And then we have this really clever technology called BLUP, which is Best Linear Unbiased Predictor, that takes then all of the environmental effects into account. So has it been reared from a young ewe? Is it a twin, triplet? Is it rearing on a high farm, on a lowland farm? And all of that information is crucial, because then the analysis takes this into account when it works out the breeding value. So if a ram has been used, let's say on the top of a hill somewhere, and that same ram has been used in a lowland flock somewhere, or progeny of his, this system will pull that out and actually will give you a comparable figure for that sheep. So it's a really neat way of doing it. And although it sounds a bit complicated, you know, we talk about breeding values and we talk about decimal points of things, it's just telling us how that sheep is going to breed for that trait. And then we take those estimated breeding values and we work out for that system or that flock what we want those sheep to do overall. So sometimes we combine all of these breeding values into an index. So that more or less takes all of these EBVs and puts a weighting on that we think or you think is important for your flock. So for example, you see that nice piece of cake there, that's showing you how that index is put together. There's a big weighting there on 8-week weight on that one. There's a big weighting, for example, on maternal ability. So that's giving you the ability to select lambs or ewes that will grow their lambs well to 8 weeks. And that's a really good indicator of mum, because after that point, we know that the lamb's performance starts to depend more on him as opposed to the milk. And all of those traits, the carcass traits, the muscle depth, fat depth, are all part of that equation then. And there's even things like litter size there. If you want to hold your scanning percent or reduce them, it goes into that overall index. So if I was going to buy a sheep and I didn't have time to look at the breeding values, I would just buy a sheep with high index. That gives me pretty much all of the good traits there. If I want to increase my lambing percentage, for example, I'll select a sheep that's still good on index, but I'll look specifically for that litter size born or reared to actually understand that I'm going to increase my lambs reared. And if I'm on a side of a hill lambing, I'm actually probably going to put more emphasis on the litter size reared than I am to the litter size born, because the environment is going to pound more on them. So I'm going to go for something that gives me live lambs to sell.
So it's a good way of thinking about it then, Dewi, that the index is kind of like a ranking system, a benchmark, an overall score, if you like, and then the EBVs are the detail and where you can tailor it to your farm.
Yeah, and obviously, you know, an index is simpler for a terminal sire quite often, because you're weighting things like growth rate, carcass traits, how quick they finish in that equation. So it's less components to look at. So certainly within terminal sires, you know, high index terminal sires, you're pretty right really going through the index, unless you really want to hone in on getting lambs to a heavier weight later, in which case you'd look at the muscle and fat components of that. Or if you wanted lambs away early to the Easter market, you'd probably really hone in on the growth rate EBV and possibly the fat EBV, especially if you've got a terminal site across you. On the maternal side, it's more complicated because there's more traits coming into that cake. So that little dairy slices, there's more there. And the more slices there are there, the least weighting there is on one specific trait. So when we talk about maternal traits, whilst index gives you an overall benefit, quite often we find farmers go into the EBVs on maternals to look for those specific traits like prolificacy or maternal ability.
Thanks, Dewi. So what I'm going to do now is I just want to see with our audience what kind of level they're at with EBVs and how much they're using them. So Carrie-Anne, if you could just launch the poll, please. So this is just a question that you just need to click one answer for. And you just need to say, do you use EBVs when choosing stock or semen to breed your breeding stock? And is it always, sometimes, or never? And then when we get to what kind of point are we at? We're at about 60% of you now roughly have completed that. So if we just wait a couple more seconds for some more answers to go through, you literally just click the circle that you think is most applicable to you. So Dewi, just while people are finishing doing that, can you just say a little bit, I know you covered it a little bit, but what information goes into the EBV, what data is collected, if you just list them off?
Yeah, sure. So let's go through a normal sheep year from now, maybe. That gives us an idea of the data capture points. So ewes are going to the ram right now. So a lot of the hill flocks that are recording will be taking a weight of the ewe and her condition score. And it's always quite useful having a ewe weight coming in, because that gives us the ability to actually manage how heavy a ewe is going to be. So ewe weight is quite an important one pre-tupping to get that in. Then when we get to pregnancy scanning, we obviously need to know which ram has gone to which ewe. So single sire mating is actually crucial for these flocks, unless they're using DNA to disentangle parentage. And both can be done, although the DNA can be a bit expensive. So we make sure we know which ram is going to which ewe, and all the good breeders will also make sure that the inbreeding isn't happening, so that there's a good spread of that genetic material across the flock. We then get into scanning time, pregnancy scanning, and it's really important to measure what that sheep is predicted to have, especially if we're using DNA parentage, because that gives us, if she's a twin scanned and she's only got a single on her later on, then it's really quite important to understand that's the case. We carry all the way through then to lambing, so we need to tag the lamb to the ewe, so we know who mum is, and then we can extrapolate back from tupping time who dad was. A lot of the terminal sire flocks will actually weigh their lambs at birth, so that there's a lamb weight, and again we can extrapolate out to ease of lambing in that. There is also a way of scoring lambing ease or vigor to know if some sires will be giving more problems than others. We then go forward to 8 weeks, where lambs are weighed, and that's a really good marker, as I said, for understanding how well mum has reared that lamb, because up to that point is predominantly milk with some grass and sometimes some creep, but ultimately that's a predominantly maternal effect. And then we throw out then to some breeders will do a weaning weight at about 11-12 weeks. Most people then will do a scanning weight, and this is muscle and back fat scanning on the lamb, and that's normally somewhere between 16 and sort of 20 weeks. We try and get people to do it as close to when those lambs are hitting, 40, 50 kilos. Some of the terminal breeds that are early lambing will even hit 60 kilos at that stage. So it's actually getting that and using that scanning information from the technicians then to feed all that back in and into the Signet database for running then the evaluations. Now, things can go wrong through all of that. So, for example, if we're cross-fostering lambs, then we need to know who mum is. If there's been embryo transfer done and lambs or embryos gone into recipients, that needs to be tracked through. So ultimately, the system is only as good as the data that goes into it. But most of the breeders I find in the UK are all about improving their genetic gains and making sure that the stock perform for the farmer.
So I'm going to come back to that briefly in a minute. Carrie-Anne, can we just pause that poll, please, and have a look what the answers are? Great. So that you're going to have to read that out because I can't see that.
Okay, so you've got always at 49%, sometimes at 30%, and never at 21%.
Great, so we've got about half the audience then don't use EBVs all the time. So this is good for this webinar. This is what we want. We want to get you away from this, making you tick that always box. So that's great. If we could just close that poll then, please, carry on. Thank you. So Dewi, I'm just coming back to that point about what you said about breeders in the UK generally all want to do a good thing. How can we trust the EBVs when the data is collected by lots of different farms? Can't people just manipulate it?
They can up to a point. The BLUP analysis takes into account quite a lot of noise in terms of what's happening there in different flocks. So if something stands out, we normally can pick that up and we can sort of question that data. But let's think of a slightly more positive note. If you're a ram breeder and if you're a customer, really that relationship should be built to be a long-lasting one. So it's not really anybody's long-term benefit to be fudging anything. So ultimately, it will come out in the wash, because if you're using a sheep that has wrong performance figures or wrong breeding values, you've got a year's grace before it starts getting pulled out in terms of that performance in other places. So really, you know, I would hope that the large majority of people are very accurate in what they do. There will be mistakes. The biggest mistake, for example, that can skew all of this is pedigree information. So in other words, at lambing time, we know that mistakes happen. If people are lambing in a shed and you come in to check at 3 o'clock in the morning and there's been a mismothering, quite often there might be a question mark of who belongs to who. So we do have, just because we think we know the pedigree of the sheep doesn't always mean to say that's the case. And then data points, you know, it's always good to calibrate scales. So it's all of those elements that actually come in there, but the software is fairly sophisticated, and Sam and his colleagues will tell you that, Emma, that it takes out a lot of that noise. But ultimately, if anybody is cheating, I'm not quite sure, you know, to what purpose and for how long, and if I'm a commercial customer, I want my ram breeder asking me how that sheep has done. And I want my ram breeder asking me, has that sheep given you the growth rate that I promised you would get? Yeah, because that's the crucial thing in all of this, is that if you're skeptical about this or skeptical about any breeder, then you get close to them and actually get that dialogue going, because ultimately that's how it works. Feedback is the crucial part in that.
And the last question, we're going to talk a little bit more about that relationship later on, because I think it's really important that you have that relationship between ram breeder and ram buyer. But just quickly before we go to Leah for some questions from the audience, a question that I get asked quite a lot or insinuated quite a lot is, do the EBVs replace the need for the stockmanship that we all know about? So assessing that it's fit for purpose, knowing that they're healthy, fit not fat, those kind of things. Do EBVs make up for that, or is that still important?
Yes, of course it is. You know, we look at sheep breeding with 3 components really. We look at first and foremost structure. So if sheep haven't got the right structure, be it mouth or feet, that's a problem. So structure is fundamental, and you can have the best or worst EBVs in the world and it won't tell you what the structure is. So we don't linear score sheep like we do dairy cows. So that's something that's a stockmanship's, you know, a stockman's ability and art really to understand, has that got good or bad structure. And that will change because, you know, lambs to shearlings, depending on the breed, how they've been brought up, what feed regimes they've been on, that changes as that goes through. So a sheep that looks to be right with a pastern or mouth as a lamb may not be as a shearling. We all know that. So the second part in that really is the phenotype, the look of the sheep. You know, so again, we can have 2 sheep, exactly the same index, and one looks a plain ugly bugger and one looks a show-winning, stomping around the ring sheep. Yeah, and that's in itself a selection criteria. And the third one is the performance figures. And one can't really be done without the others. And I suppose that's where I'm coming at in terms of the people that say no adamantly. Just because you're not recording the sheep or buying them doesn't make those sheep particularly bad. In fact, of those sheep that you're not selecting, some will be very good on performance and some won't be. But actually, you know, so it's actually putting those three components next to each other when we're looking at this. So buying, you know, a hind-leg sheep or a good EBV for something won't give you the phenotype you want and won't necessarily tell you the structure. And I think this is when we then get these sort of regimented views of saying, oh, all these recorded sheep are SH1T because they look plain buggers. Well, that's because that breeder is selecting for those kinds of sheep. Yeah, you could have the breeder that you absolutely adore the look of their sheep with sheep that can be performance recorded the same. There'll be stuff at the top and stuff at the bottom. So it's not a, you know, one size fits all. Those decisions are based on breeders' preferences.
So the EBVs are just another tool in the toolbox then, just to help.
Yeah, but the bloody vital tool, because I'll give you an example. We sell about 600-700 rams every year, unseen by farmers. They just order them to be delivered to do a job. And we've had feedback from farmers to say, that wouldn't have been the sheep I would have bought in the sale. But my God, they've actually done what we wanted them to do. So you can't make sensible decisions without knowing how the performance of those sheep are. Yeah, and I know that's a difficult one because people have been doing this for decades and centuries. But there's lots of stuff that influences that in terms of, you know, has that sheep been reared a single when it was born a twin? Has it had creep up to its ears all its life? You know, has the mother actually been really tested in the system? So all of those elements have an influence in how that sheep's going to perform. And we are very good stockmen in the UK. We can make a sheep look very good when it's not. So it's trying to disentangle that. So it's not the Holy Grail, but without it, you're actually quite blind.
Thank you, Dewi. I think that's a really good point. Leah, what have we got coming in?
Nice, easy one to start with. Emma, will a recording be available after the webinar?
Yes.
Next up, are EBVs available for health factors such as lameness and resistance or resilience to parasites?
Do you want me to take that? Yeah, okay. So for worm resistance, again, it depends on the breeder or the group in terms of what they do. So there are some breeds, for example, like the Llyn Breed Society, the Exlana guys, that are working hard in challenging their sheep for worm resistance. So they're challenging their sheep. They're dealing, you know, they're not drenching lambs because we don't need to drench ewes anyway. So they're not drenching lambs, doing mob counts until the levels get high enough, and actually then taking individual feck samples and making sure these sheep can perform with very high levels. And some of them are actually also using a saliva test to go with that, so it gives you a bit more accuracy again with the genetic makeup of that animal. And you can get a sheep that actually has a breeding value for feck, fecal egg count. And that can be resilience or resistance, but ultimately it's giving you sheep that can perform with that challenge, or either with that challenge or will give you less worms to challenge the rest of your flock. So that's one that's out there. In terms of lameness or foot structure, there isn't one commercially available. You need to go to your individual breeder there and understand, you know, what their approach to lameness is. And the first question with that is, you know, how much lameness do you have in your flock? Is it 1, 2, 3, 4%, 5%? And people that are on it will tell you it's this, 3 sheep in 100. And then what their treatment is, what their approach to biosecurity is, and what their treatment is. Do they trim feet? Do they not? We shouldn't be trimming feet anymore, so we don't need to. So neither should the ram breeder that you're buying your rams from trim feet. Do you then treat with antibiotic? And if you do you do that forever in a day, or do you give them an opportunity to say if they wrong you a second time, they get culled? Those are the kinds of management interventions that have an impact on that. There are some genomic markers or genetic markers for foot rot, but when we've actually assessed them, and SAC did some work on looking at some of the Lincoln University outcomes, it wasn't carrying through particularly well into the UK. So I'm not sure that we've got foot rot resistant markers that are applicable here, but your breeder is your place to understand what's happening with your foot structure and lameness, really. And
so
there is a technique for all this stuff.
So it comes back to that conversation again, doesn't it? Leah, what's next on the list?
I've got one here that's more of a statement rather than a question. So when buying breeds or crossbreeds off the hills, you can't really buy stock on EBVs. So therefore, the answer to buying on the EBV poll could not be 100% for many commercial farmers.
Yeah, well, what I would add to that, Leah, is that, you know, we're involved in a project in Wales, the Hill Ram scheme, and I think there is a session on that, Emma, later this week in Wales, one of the sheep breeders sessions. So if any of you are on a hill system, please link into that, because it'll actually have some quite nice findings. And there are best part of 50 farmers in Wales that are recording on a hill. And there's some of those farmers that have come at this from a very skeptical background of saying, I'm not sure if this can be done, I'm not sure if it works, but they're on that journey. And there's some really useful findings in that we can come through. But the crucial thing with hill recording is doing it in the environment the sheep have to perform in. And DNA parentage is one tool that enables us to do that. So one of my colleagues, Janet Roden, I think will be talking about that on one of the sessions, whichever day it is. So it is developing slowly.
No, brilliant, thank you. Leah, we've probably got time for one more quick one before we move on to David.
Okay, what would be considered the most important out of structure, performance or phenotype? Is there something to be said about health and genotype as well?
Absolutely, in terms of health. So let's say we've got the prize ram that's good on all of the other bits, index, looks the part, structure's good, but he's going to bring borders disease into your flock. You're going to have 20% barren ewes, and you're going to have a lot of hairy shaker lambs in the next 3 years. So actually, you know, the health component of what you bring in with your ram is fundamental. And again, that's why the dialogue with the ram breeder has to be there. In terms of if you were going to rank those three elements together, I could tell you that a ram that actually has good breeding values, that's the ugliest bugger ever, will probably give you the most return. But if you're going to try and sell breeding stock from him to other breeders, that ain't going to happen. Or if he's a loose coated thing, because wool is actually quite a high heritability, it's a strong trait, and he's loose coated, and you're trying to sell lambs live in a mat, you're not going to get the premium for those lambs because they're slack. Yeah. So overall breeding values will drive profitability for you, but in certain instances, depending on how you operate within your market, they won't. There'll be things that undermine them. So it's very difficult to answer that. Overall, go for performance, and in a simple system, it will win out every time based on the figures. But if I'm selling in a live mart and I need, you know, Texely nosed sheep with tight skins, then having that trait or that phenotype not right doesn't help me. If I've got something that's got bad foot structure and he's going to last me 2 years instead of 5, then my investment for that ram is down the drain. So I'll get good lambs for 2 years as terminal sires, but then I'm going to kill the bugger because he's actually not giving me longevity. So there is no simple answer, but performance goes and works depending on your system.
Yeah, and we're coming back to it being a tool in the box again, aren't we? And there's so many other different influencing factors. Thank you very much, Dewi. I'm going to ask you to turn your camera off now, but I might get you back when we get some more questions in. And David, if I could have you, please. Hello. Oh, he's on mute. Carrie Ann, can we send him a mute request, please? How are we doing?
Hello.
There
Welcome
we go.
to everybody.
That worked well. So, David, introduce yourself. Where do you come from? What do you do?
Right. Okay. David Rossiter. I'm a sheep farmer from South Devon. People say it's the sunny southwest. Well, yes, it is sunny southwest, but it has its other problems as well. My background, realistically, is a dairy farmer. I did my original training with dairying in the States. I'm not a college boy. I was always a practical boy. And from then, I was lucky enough to win a scholarship to go to New Zealand, where I looked at dairying, but I also looked at sheep, because over the years, it was my original pocket money that put the Polled Dorset onto the farm. So that's a bit of my background. Following on from that, we had a major hit. They took out 89 head in one hit in 2007, TB. Made the decision then that I'd had enough of fighting TB for 4 years. we would focus on the sheep. Today, we run in about 500 Poll Dorset ewes, principally lambing in the autumn. We run about 200 Suffolk-Aber Blacks. And also on top of that, we're running around about 500 Ex-Lanas, part of the SIG group. So as you can see, I've got quite a broad spectrum of sheep background. The point I would like to make is that you have to go back. The original session is talking about back to basics. And to me, one of the basic things about sheep farming is, what style of life do you want? Which sheep can match it? And which sheep will match your farm? I'm in an area which grows grass in the autumn quite easily from September through until late November. So to me, it's useful to have a flock of ewes which lamb in September and go through into the autumn with their suckling their lambs. So we meet the early market, we produce stock for the breeding market. That fits the bill. The Aber Black stroke Suffolk Aber Black, whichever way you like to put it, they lamb in January. They in turn produce shearling rams for the commercial market. And finally, the Ex-Lana. Well, I wanted a flock, when I went out of dairying after the TB, I wanted a flock which would lamb in the spring and utilize all the rougher pasture, whether it be out on the cliffs or some of the steep land, which we felt we really could do with something which would lamb in the spring, survive the droughts, which we can get July, August, and then we would then turn around and slaughter the lambs in the autumn. And they fitted that bill very well as a low cost, low input breed of sheep. So I think it's those combinations of breeds which match the farm. And I think that is so important before we talk anywhere further down the line, because I think sheep farmers want to identify where the end product is going to end up, whether it's a breeding animal or whether it's a slaughter animal. Do you want to finish it early with creep feeding, or do you want to take it through to a store and finish it off roots? So that's a little bit about where we are today.
And so the end market is massive in your system then, and should be in most people's, but we sometimes miss that.
I think it's fundamental. The number of, because of my system, the number of people I meet in the course of my job selling breeding stock, you know, they'll be starting in sheep, and the first question is, where do you want to sell your stock? And that has to be the first question.
So just coming back then to the performance recording side of it, you have performance recorded flocks. Why do you do that?
Why do I do that? I want to take risk out. My performance recording has taken me to all sorts of different places. My background, in as much as I bought a fair bit of land after my mother died, I bought the business from my father as it was at that time, pre-quotas. So I had to walk down the high street and take my hat off to the bank manager. Needless to say, I still have to take my hat off to the bank manager, but I feel a bit more comfortable in as much as that I think we can reduce the risk. And to me, performance recording is reducing the risk. So when I go to a market and buy a ram, which is correct type and all those other bits and pieces, but has the plus factor of recording, I know that that ram then will give me that little bit extra. And there are several ways in which I can illustrate that with the way we've recorded over the years.
Yeah. Should we talk through a bit of that then?
Yeah, by all means.
So when that comes up on the screen, do you want to just talk me through this, David? What is it?
Yeah. I think one of the fundamental things which I would like to highlight is that those who can see the numbers is the fact the number of lambs which are being recorded. We're not talking about a 50 ewe flock or a 70 ewe flock or a 25 ewe flock. We're talking about recording somewhere in the region from 500 to 800 lambs, which is a significant number to get some positive indication of what we're doing. The two lines set on that graph are showing from 1992, I think it is, the one down the bottom, 1992 to 2021. We're talking about a 30-year period of what that has done for me. And that particular growth, those two lines are actually indicating a maternal index and a terminal index. Yes, there will be blips in it. That is inevitable because sometimes rams click with you, sometimes they don't. In my case, I'm a great fan of using genetics from the Southern Hemisphere. they come into the flock, and on a maternal side, it takes a little bit longer for them to actually show the positives which they've brought me. I don't know whether you, just out of interest, there are a couple of figures I think within the recording which we use. To me, the 8-week EBV is an important one because it indicates the milk on a maternal side of what the ewes are doing. Well, in 1992, and don't forget, we're comparing like with like. These actual figures are generated in 2021 against lambs in 1992 on the same base. Well, in 1992, on that basis, we had a negative EBV at 8 weeks of minus 1.55. In 2020, that was plus 1.42. So we've gained nearly 3 kilograms on our EBV. And it's that positive contribution. It's that positive contribution it has made to making the flock more profitable and paying the bills.
So this chart then shows it in a figure sense and on an index sense of how far you've come in 30 years, which is massive. What I think our audience will also be interested in is maybe a little bit about the changes that you've maybe seen on farm. So I'm just going to share the next slide. Did you just want to mention this a little bit?
Yeah, it's really just reflecting the EBVs which we talked about originally, how the growth has improved, and that then is reflected in the days to slaughter. Whereas back in 1992, we would have ended up selling our autumn lambs. We would have been selling them sort of well into March. Now we're virtually all clear by the middle of February. And don't forget, I'm pulling off the best for breeding. So shall we say it's the bottom end, which we're talking about when we look at the slaughter. And similarly with the ex-Lanas, the first crop of wool shedding sheep, which were coming through the system, I was lucky it was a year when there was a price spike in February, and that's when they started to be sold. Today, we're selling them in the autumn, and will be cleared out by the end of this month. So, you know, it's just the use of EBVs to turn things around quicker and put more money in my pocket.
So you're getting lambs away much quicker.
Yep.
I'm just looking at this then, you've moved from 56% twins to 63% twins.
Yep.
Getting an extra 3 kilos at 8 weeks on your singles and an extra 2.5 kilos at 8 weeks on your twins. And have you changed any other management things in there, or is that just figures? Or are they getting more creep, or what's going into that?
No, everything is basically the same. We do work on creep, but because of the fact that we're trying to breed a ewe which milks well, the lambs don't want the creep as early as they would have done previously because they just don't need it. And so, you know, we're now looking at 6 to 8 weeks before they start to think about eating the creep. So once again, that's got to be another good cost bonus.
And just to come back to that then, so on the female side, what are you doing to ensure your homebred female replacements are good? What do you look at specific EBVs on the tups, or how do you make sure those female replacements are where they need to be?
No, we do look at the EBVs on the tups we buy, but we also look to see the lambs we have on the deck. Several years ago, I sort of split them out on an index level. We've now got our average indexes above the breed averages, so everything we're producing is above breed average. But within that, we will identify if we want 50 ewe lambs or 100 ewe lambs. We put them out to one side in index, and similarly all the others we will put in another pen. When I did it originally, and I'm going back several years now, I decided, right, okay, I'm going to see if I can follow this track and see where it takes me. We found that in the ones which perhaps didn't match the performance figures we wanted, there were some attractive sheep.
Yep.
I looked at them and said, no, I'm not going to move them. I'm going to leave them alone. And the ones which had got the performance but really hadn't got the phenotype, I hiked them out. And I can honestly say now we've got to the point of saying, right, we're after the top performance. We'll pick out those ewe lambs, and the phenotype actually comes with them.
Brilliant. And how do you, just before we go to Leah for questions then, so I'll make this my last one to now, how do you make sure, because you're breeding for commercial customers, but you're also breeding for yourself. How do you make sure your tups for commercial customers are what they need?
I think fundamentally you've got to look at the sheep and how you've reared it. My background being dairying, I understand the guts of a cow. The scientists tell me it takes 6 weeks of those the bugs in the cow's gut to change from a winter diet to a spring diet, i.e. grass. And I look at a sheep and think, well, a sheep really is a miniature cow. So if you turn around and say, right, okay, that ram has been stuffed with cereals for all its life, the bugs in that gut will be totally different to one which has been reared on forage. I'm not necessarily saying grass, but on forage. And so over the years, we've learned to move to a system which is forage based. Yep. And so, for example, our shearlings get no concentrate from the day that they have finished their creep with mum to the day they're sold. And I think hopefully that is giving the longevity and the return customers which we pick up.
That's a massive thing, isn't it? Return customers, because that's when you know.
Oh, definitely. That is my business. That is my business. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Leah, I'm just going to bring you back in. Was there anything for David or Dewi?
Nothing specific for David has come through yet, but I do have a few more for Dewi, if you want to do those now.
Yeah, Dewi, if you could just come back on, please. And then David, feel free to come in from your point of view as well.
Yeah.
We've had a few reminders from colleagues as well that Tuesday night is that hill breeding session.
Good.
So first up, Dewi, so why doesn't Innovis use AHDB's Signet breeding service to create your EBVs? Is it because you think you can do a better job, or is it because you don't want your figures and printed details displayed openly in public?
Oh my goodness. 2 options of answers, isn't it? There you go. I have got a better one actually, but there we go. When we first started doing our breeding program, we were mixing breeds, rightly or wrongly, for people's views. So we wanted to take the strengths of all the breeds that were available in the UK and in New Zealand into our breeding program. And at the time, and we're going back to 2006, 2007, we decided that we were actually better placed at that stage to be able to deal with those breed differences in our evaluation, because it was effectively composite breeding. And because we were working with New Zealand partners, Focus Genetics in New Zealand, we could learn from them how they were dealing with some of these elements. So initially, we felt that we could do it better from a composite breeding point of view. I would say that that's not the case now. I think because there's lots more people actually mixing breeds, that I think we could probably use Signet AHDB perfectly fine. And it's something we're continually considering doing, especially with Ram Compare now, because that actually takes it into the commercial sector. In terms of not sharing info, well, that's just silly, because who would we be kidding? We sell to 1,000 farmers every year with 250 new customers every year. Do you think people would still carry on buying from us if we were trying to pull the wool over their eyes? And I think that comes back again to the relationship with the farmer and the breeder. If you're really engaged with your customer and you want to see the customer improve and grow their business by using your genetics, you've got a vested interest in their sheep working. So I would be very foolish and short-sighted to be fudging anything to anybody, because ultimately I want them to buy every year going forward. So I think that's the gist of it, really. We do certain things. We do trait development, and Janet Roden, who is our main geneticist, works closely with Sam and the AHDB team. So although we are sort of recording separately, we're very much mirroring, you know, the AHDB recording and graphs and how it's done, so that not to confuse people. But maybe we'll cover that back in how you find rams at the end, Emma, just to show those slight differences. Hopefully that answers it to people. But
no, yeah, go on, David.
Well, I think it's fair to say that whether Innovis are doing their recording or Signet is doing its recording, the point as a commercial ram breeder is we want our stock to make money for our clients. That is the fundamental thing, because if they're profitable, like Dewi said, yes, he's picking up 250 new customers. Yes, but he hasn't told you the fact most probably the ones he's got don't need more rams because they're lasting longer. And that's his plug. So you're all the time looking for fresh customers if you can produce the longevity in the breeding stock which you sell. But it's their profitability which is important.
Thanks, David. Have we got another one, Leah?
Yes, one for David. Have you sourced unrecorded rams, and if so, how did they perform?
Yeah, I have. It was interesting. Like I said, I've imported genetics from Australia and New Zealand. I've done a bit of homework over there before I brought them in. Maternally, they've added things to my flock, but I have to accept the fact that I see a dip in the first couple of years. With regard to the actual terminal side, they've added tremendously because of the growth rates which they bring.
Sorry, whose phone's going off?
Yeah. That'll keep him quiet, shut him off. Yeah, so yeah, I apologize for that. So yes, you know, I do occasionally bring in from outside, and it was when I was talking about a ram stomach earlier on, I thought it was interesting. I brought a ram in this year with the idea of using him as a sweeper to see what he could do. I brought him home and he went into a grass field. I didn't feed him any concentrate. I was told he'd come from high up in the hills, and so therefore he would be hard. Needless to say, he's melted. So from that, I've deduced that the bugs in his guts are not the same as the bugs in my sheep's guts, and so we'll wait and see. So yes, we do try outside, but we try and use it as a marker to see where we're going ourselves.
And I'd just like to add to that as well, just to say an unrecorded ram isn't necessarily a bad ram. It doesn't mean it's going to take you backwards. It could take you forwards, but you don't know until you've got it home and you've got a couple of crops of lambs on the ground. And if that's your females that you're breeding and female replacements, that, I won't call it a mistake, but that not using the information is going to be replicated in your flock for years to come. So it's just a risk, coming back to the risk factors again.
It's risk, that's right. Yeah.
And I'll probably add
quickly.
Yeah, very quickly. Sometimes you have to bring in new blood because you have to open your genetic base. And like David says, some of them will perform, but they bring other things into your flock, so they may just help phenotype sometimes, and then you can use their daughters back into the system. So it's always an option that everybody should consider.
Brilliant. Thank you. I'm going to say goodbye again to you three, and Adrian, hello to you, hopefully.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, fine, thank you. You?
No, not too bad, thank you. Right, I'm going to stick your pictures on the screen, hopefully. Who do you are? What do you do? Where do you come from?
Right, Adrian Coombe. I farm on the Devon-Cornwall border on the proper side, the Cornwall side. We run 500 North Country mules and 120 ewe lambs. We're part of the AHDB and QMS and AHDB and HCC project Ram Compare. And I'm also just a strategic farmer as well.
Great. So what's your story with EBVs? Where did you start?
Probably about 7 or 8 years ago, I sort of, farming partnership with my dad, or used to, and we, I sort of said we ought to be looking at EBVs as a way to buy rams. Figures have got to be more reliable than just buying something that looks good. And yep. I think I had a AHDB manuals, with how to buy a ram with the EBVs, and started to look at where we could go with it and how to decipher the mass of figures, basically. So from there, we did buy 1 or 2 performance recorded rams in the first year. I didn't need any in the next year, and then I got approached by Ram Compare, which was about 5 seasons ago, and I've been using performance recorded rams ever since that they've chosen for me.
So tell us a bit about Ram Compare then. What's that?
Ram Compare is, well, basically it's trying to prove or showing that EBVs in a commercial setting are actually working. That bit of paper is transferable into what we get in the lambs and what you see at the final end. I mean, they've done, well, this is my 5th breeding season with them, but they've done another 2 before I joined. And I think at the end of year 5, they'd tested 283 rams from 11 different breeds. Right. So there's a lot of figures coming in from a lot of different breeds to build a realistic picture of what is actually going on a commercial farm. I'm was one of 9 farms in phase 2. So across the country, across different systems, across different breeds.
So what happens with that then? Where do you get your tups from?
They come all from pedigree breeders.
Right.
This year I've got 8 live rams and we've had 5 AI rams as well across, I think it's 6 different breeds. All in the top 25% of the breed. That's sort of the bench or base mark they've got to be to come in. And within the breeds, there's always a variation of the breeding values, to give a contrast to see if that actually does make a difference.
Okay. So you're getting these tups from pedigree scenarios, and I think going back to one of the questions or one of the things we spoke about earlier was whether they are just for pedigree systems. You're obviously taking them out onto commercial flocks. Just remind us what ewes you have.
All North Country mules off a single farm, so it's very genetically similar as such.
Yeah, and how many of those?
500 are used for ram compare.
And how many are in the whole flock?
There's 120 ewe lambs as well, so that's the ewe lambs, the only thing's not used for ram compare.
Okay, so what happens then? What have you seen once you get these pedigree tups and you take them into your commercial system? What happens?
They're all single sire mated, so they're in groups with 40, 50 ewes, which gives us a few headaches at tupping time, trying to keep them all separate and having enough grass. But they're all kept all single sire mated. We then at lambing time, we record birth weights, birth ease, obviously the sex. I think what else we record. There's quite a few little things we record. Yeah. I guess back to the ram compare, and then at 8 weeks we weigh them, the lambs. Basically every 2 weeks after 8 weeks old. And at 12 weeks they come and do a muscle depth and fat depth scan as well. Yeah. They're very similar to what they would do with the commercial rams.
Yep. So now what I want to do is just look at some of the differences you've seen on farm.
Yep.
So what I'm sharing on screen now then is some of your performance data that you've seen on farm. They're not EBVs, they're real differences to you. Some of the data that you've seen on farm for your 2020 lamb crop. Do you just want to talk me through this a little bit?
Yeah, obviously the top figure is your days of slaughter, which every day.
What are the 2 different columns? Sorry, Adrian.
Oh, 2 different columns. There's one that's a top 10% maternal sire, and the one that's in the bottom is 25%.
Okay, so we've got a bit of a high-low trial going on then here. We've got a good ram, and they're the same breed, aren't they?
It would probably actually be it's not bottom 25%. He's at 25% mark. He's still in the top 25% of the breed, but he's on the 25% line rather than the other ones on 10% line.
Yes, we've got a higher ram and a lower ram. We'll just that. There are a higher ram and a lower ram. David, your mic's still on, just so you're aware. We've put these 2 rams together and we're looking at the differences in their progeny. So just talk me through this then. Days to slaughter, what's the difference?
Well, basically 50 days, which every day that lamb's on the farm is costing you money to feed. Even on a grass-based system, which is what we are, it's still a kilo of dry matter of grass. They say is about 7p. Well, they easily eat that every day. Also, within that time, in a normal year, you see a drop off in the price. So the faster you get a lamb away, usually the more it's worth per kilo. And then going to the next one, the carcass weight. There's also a 0.2 a kilo difference in the final fat value, which that adds. I know it's only a little bit of a weight, but that adds up to a lot of money over 50, 100 lambs.
And I guess it is only 0.2, but it's 0.2 50 days quicker as well, isn't it?
Oh, exactly, yeah. Yeah, it's obviously got a better feed conversion or just growth rate, and it's performing a lot better.
Yep. So E&U grades, what differences did you see there?
There's, it says on the screen, there's 11% difference. Obviously, that also has an effect on your end price, which, another 10p per kilo. Again, over 20 kilos, there's another £2-3 a lamb. It all adds up. And with the graded 2 and 3L, it's the same. There's a 20% difference in those lambs actually hitting spec. So if you're hitting spec, you're getting if you're hitting base spec, you're getting the most out of the lamb you can. Whereas, with the ones in the bottom 25%, there's probably more 4s and 4Ls, 4Hs. So obviously that brings your price down then.
So we've done a bit of a back of a fag packet calculation, haven't we?
Yeah.
And what have you worked out then is the difference in pound per lamb?
Pound per lamb is about £4.72. I mean, that's going back to the grass figures as well. I've got the figures in front of me for this year so far, and I mean, there's 3 Charolais on farm and 3 meat links, and within those, each breed, there's a £3 difference per lamb between the top performing and the worst performing one.
Right.
And that's without taking days of slaughter into account. So, and those figures do actually follow what the EBVs would be showing me as well.
Yeah.
Or the index.
Yeah. And it all adds up. So we also looked at over kind of a lifetime of 3.5 years, what that would be adding up to you as real change on farm, and we got that at over £1,000. So it's a big difference. And the other thing I just added on here was from Duncan Nellis and Philip and Charlie Whitehouse as well. So it was just, these are 2 other Ram Compare farmers, and we've seen similar stories for them as well. So with Duncan, he got extra carcass weight, and for the Whitehouses, it was about in spec and getting more lambs in their specification. So just to come back to you then, Adrian, what have been your kind of biggest learning points with regards to EBVs, you would say? Because I think when we've had this conversation offline before, you said kind of 6 or 7 years ago, you were at the same point as a lot of the people on this webinar will be, which is kind of, know I should use them, but don't really know where to start.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of looking at 1 or 2 key traits. I mean, like Dewey said, it's sort of growth rates, fat cover, and sort of matching it to your use. And breed isn't as important as we thought it would be. Having used sort of 7 or 8 different breeds through the project, certain breeds have got different sort of places to be within the market. I mean, we're looking for weight because that's what our system is geared for. So we'd be looking more like the Charolais, the meat link, and not so much the traditional breeds, which tend to be lighter carcass. It's what you're looking for and what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
But when it comes to buying rams, I mean, a few years ago, we had a ram turn up on farm. He was very much grass fed, and they'd had a drought where they were, and they were struggling for grass. Came in very, very plain, and he turned up in the shed, and both me and Dad said, well, we would never have bought that in the market, not on a month of Sundays. And he ended up being one of the quickest finishing rams we've had on the farm. I think he had a minus 21 day finishing time.
Right.
So yeah, that's a big value. And I mean, saying that I had a flock health group here one day, and I think it was 4 Charolais rams in a pen. And I said to them, which one would you choose to buy and take home? And they all picked one, which, to be fair with him, he was the second highest ranked one on the EBVs. For the lowest ranked one, the highest ranked one was the one they would have bought last. He was slightly smaller, but he had the genetic potential.
Yeah, and you've seen his lambs
Yeah.
do and fly and be the most profitable. So it comes back, I guess it comes back to this thing of EBVs are just another tool of all the different things you have to make a decision. And if you're not using them, you're building risk into your enterprise.
Oh, that totally, yeah. I mean, if you go and buy a car, a machine, you know, a tractor or whatever, you're always looking to see what engine's in it. You know, it's not what the body looks like, it's what's actually underneath the bonnet. And same with rams. You know, I mean, Dewey said, you know, you can feed with stockmanship, you can feed something to look really, really good. It might not actually perform. You know, it might come out and melt, it might just not have the goods in it to start off with.
Yeah, no, thank you. Leah, have we got any questions?
We do, we've got a couple here. Adrian, since being involved in RAM Compare, are you convinced by EBVs? In other words, after the project, will you continue to source RAMs as EBVs?
100%, yes. I mean, like I said, I was looking at them 8 years ago. Dad was more skeptical, you know, and I've actually convinced him now as well. So it's something we will be looking at. You know, if we do, when we come out RAM Compare eventually, we will be buying EBVs. And yeah.
And which figures will you be looking for in particular? Scan weight, muscle depth, or more generally overall index?
Index has a big thing to play with it, but I mean, it does, it's sort of marrying it up with my use slightly. You know, it's a little bit of plus fat is always good because in mules tends to be a fairly plain sheet. Muscle depth, of course, and yeah, days to slaughter and the growth rates.
And what would you think about the various terminal sires you've tested on farm? Have you got a favourite?
I mean, like I said, we're looking for weight, and we were always where Charolais before. And if we, you know, when we come back to buying rams ourselves, we'll probably be looking at Charolais and Meat Links. You know, Meat Link has been having not known anything about it at all beforehand, it's been a pleasant surprise for us. So we probably have the mix of two, or, you know, maybe a bit of Suffolk gear as well. But yeah, we're looking for weight, so that's what we'll be buying.
Okay. As you move forward, would you evolve your use to a maternal self-replacing composite, or would you stick with the mule?
At the moment, we're happy buying the genetics in. We use one farm up in near Skipton, and we've got a very good relationship with him that, you know, we've been dealing with him for 8 or 9 years. And I mean, you go down the route of breeding maternal ewes, that's something else to be looking at. And we're very much a mixed business here, and it's having the time to be looking at those figures as well and getting it right. You know, it's got to be attention to detail, and if I'm rushing things, that doesn't work.
Emma, I've got a few more questions, but they relate back to the slide. Have you got time for that now, or do you want to bring that up again later?
I will stick the slide up now, and if we just have one of those now. So this is Adrian's slide with his data on, is it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, right. I will just put that up quickly, and yeah, if we could just have one.
Okay. Could you just clarify then, the bottom 25% RAM, is he just inside the top 25%? So he is good, he's within that top 25%, but he could be better. Is that what you're saying?
I think I pulled that data from the national evaluations as they stand today. And as they stand today, once his RAM Compare data has been pulled into it, he sits between the bottom 25% and average. So he's just worse than average.
Got it. Okay.
Sorry for any confusion there.
It's all right.
Thank you.
It's always hard when somebody else has played with the data on your behalf. Right, thank you very much. Dewi, if we could have you back, please. Thank you very much, Adrian. I will get you back shortly.
We're back.
Oh, there you are. Hello. So then, if you could just talk me through while I get my slides back in a place that they need to be, could you just talk us through how you would find EBVs then, please? And I'll just put this on the screen. There you go.
Sure, there you go. Perfect slide to go up, Emma. Let's start by saying that EBVs and figures. This is about breeders. This is about breeding. And although we're talking about figures, I wouldn't get too hooked up on the actual individual figures of rams at this stage. I would always look for a flock that I trust or somebody that you know trusts, and I would look to speak to that breeder. And the best person to guide you through this will be that breeder, because they'll have a vested interest in what you buy doing a job for you. But for those of you that are IT savvy and have got husbands and wives and children or grandchildren that are IT savvy, there's a really good way of actually getting some of that information ready. And Emma's put up there the flock finder, and that's really useful because, you know, this is on the Signet AHDB website, which I think the link is there somewhere, or you can provide the link anyway.
You'll be getting that in the follow-up.
Yeah, signetdata.com, I think. And that flock finder, I've got on my phone, just did it before, because I was thinking, well, how's Adrian going to find his Charolais tups? So I just tapped in Charolais tups and I tapped in my postcode, and look, I've got a ream of Charolais breeders up and down the country that are really on top of what they're doing. And the same would be if Adrian was looking for meatlings, the same. So you can look for flocks here, and those flocks give you an insight into where these farmers are. If somebody knows them that you trust, so much the better, and speak to them and get through with them. You can hone into the sheep they have for sale, and as those other screens, you can either search for an ID, or you can actually look at what sheep they're going to have on sale. But we know that selling sheep in the UK is quite complex, you know, running from buying a farm to having an auction mart, to having very quick mart sometimes that you don't even know what's going to be in there. So the thing that we don't do is go to a mart and decide to buy there and then without speaking to the breeder, because you're going to buy yourselves a heap of problems in terms of health, because you're going to bring in all sorts of nasty diseases. You're going to buy yourself a sheep that's been well fed, and a bargain is never a bargain, because the value of that ram is the number of sheep he tups and gets in lamb, times the number of years he's working for you. Yeah, so if you pay 500-600 quid for your tup, that's not your tup cost. Your tup cost is that 500 quid divided by 80 ewes a year times 4 seasons or 5 seasons he's working for you. Or it could be as little as 50 ewes a year and he's dead by the second year. So your ram cost is the number of ewes and lambs he produces for you, which is why breeders that look at longevity, that don't, you know, that don't push stock too much, that actually work with their systems, are the kind of people you want to be buying with. So there is a really good resource online there where you can actually do the homework, you can find these flocks, but I would always urge you to actually take the human element in all this and pick up the phone and say, I'm Joe Blogs, I'm farming, I've not used breeding value rams or recorded rams, but I'm semi-interested. Do you mind if I come and visit you? And that will be by far the best way that you will get to understand what's happening in that flock, and trust and invest in the breeder. Let them help you choose the sheep, and then you decide in a year or two's time whether that's doing what it needs for you or whether you need to change or tweak things slightly.
And how important is that feedback, Dewi, so that if a tup hasn't worked for you, that you don't just sit and grumble about it to your mates in the pub, you actually feed that back?
Absolutely, because again, people that are professional looking forward with this will want to know. You know, I'd want to know if something hasn't worked, and I'd want to put it right, to be honest with you, or I certainly want to try and steer towards, you know, a different kind of sheep to do that job for you. So I think it's really crucial in terms of that, but buy from people you like and people you trust, yeah, because those two things make it a much nicer experience for everybody. You know, because, and hopefully you will like people on your wavelength, and that's the kind of people you need to be buying from, and there's plenty of them, and the majority of the people on that flock finder listings will be exactly that. There will be people that have seen past wanting to get big money for that ram and not see you again, to people that want to invest in your business and what you're going forward with. Now, that doesn't mean to say for a minute that somebody that's in the top of the breed in terms of selling their rams for big money have got rubbish sheep, because some of those sheep will be really high performers and some won't. And it's a bit like that tuck that Adrian's got in that bottom 25% or just above that. To look at him, you probably think he's quite a decent tuck. And if you'd gone to the mart, wherever Adrian bought him, Exit or wherever, and you look at him and you think, actually, that's a decent tuck. And he's good money because he's actually 200 quid or 300 quid or 500 quid. But actually, his impact in your flock, you could see £1,000 in his lifetime difference in what that impact of the ram is going to be in that flock versus something that can perform.
And even more if you're keeping females as well.
Yeah, the maternal one is even greater because that's the engine room of your farm. What I would say, Adrian, making reference to buying ewe lambs from or gimmers from a farm, we've got some of our customers that will actually buy the maternal ram to the hill farm to produce them females. So they're that integrated that they will actually come and buy and work with the hill farmer to say, well, this is the genetics I want feeding in from your horned ewe, and I'll actually go halves on that tuck with you because this is what I want to come in. Now that's proper partnership in it. And if you've got a smallish flock, and I would say, 300 ewes or less, I think, having replacement bought in from somebody you trust is actually quite a neat model. But trust is the crucial part there. You can't be buying a dozen sheep here, there, and everywhere. Otherwise, your vets will have an early death and they won't like that.
I'm just going to, in the interest of time, I am just going to move on, Dewi. Quickly, if you could just talk us through, this is a sale chart and this is what you will see when you go out looking for breeding stock or semen. Can you just talk us through what this actually means and the different important bits on this chart?
Sure. So first of all, that Dalby flock is quite a good flock because he might be watching and I know him quite well. So let's start there, a reputable breeder. In terms of the data that you see there, if I go from top to bottom, I look at 8-week weight. So that's telling me that actually those lambs have been grown well. That's 2.17 kilos above the average. So that's good growth. That's an influence from mum and a little bit of influence from the lamb. Litter size is 0. So their average on prolificacy for that breed or for the analysis. Maternal ability is really good, 1.14. So you see those yellow lines coming to the right. That's good. So things moving to the right is what we want to see. The fact is litter size 0 doesn't really matter if it's a terminal sire. If it's a ewe flock, if I wanted to increase my prolificacy, I want to see a yellow bar going to the right on that litter size. But it depends entirely what my starting point is for the breed and also for, and this is a Charolais, I assume, on this one. The scan weight the maternal ability tells me that those ewes are going to grow their lambs well, which is a reflection on that 8-week weight. The scan weight is telling me how quickly those lambs are going to push up there. So by that sort of 16, 20 weeks, by slaughter time, really, for most of you, 42, 43 kilos, they're going to be 5.35 kilos heavier than the average on the breed. And you're going to see about half of that based on the fact that your ewe flock effectively is the neutral component in all of that. Muscle depth is really good, so you're going to have well-fleshed lambs coming through that, which means that they'll grade quite well. And if you think muscle depth is a really strong point in this ram, if you want to improve your carcass grades, he's going to do that for you and they're going to get there quite quickly. The fat depth is minus 0.22, so that's telling me that he's actually going to carry weight up. So if I'm hitting 17 kilo carcasses now, I'm actually probably going to move my carcass weight up by using this ram because he's going to grow there quickly and he's got really good muscle, but he's going to not get too fat too soon, which means that he's ideal for that. I can still probably use him for a later lambing flock if I want, because of that muscle depth. He'll always handle quite well his lambs, although they're slightly leaner, because that's an element of the muscle depth in all of that. His index is way up there, and his maternal index is pretty good as well. So if you want to keep breeding females off him, Charolais cross ewes, then actually he's a pretty good all-round sheep in all of that. And really that accuracy column is really important there because that's telling me there's a lot of data on the sheep, so I can trust these figures. If those accuracy figures are down to say, let's say 40%, then it may not go quite that way because of what's gone into him. So that's a rock solid sheep. So,
Dewi, what's a reasonable accuracy figure-ish ballpark if we're looking at ram lambs? Because obviously we're not going to have the progeny on round to get up to 99% with a ram lamb.
Yeah, you need some to give you that proper. Normally, within our end, we would want to see 60–70% really.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, 60–70. So yeah, we shouldn't be expecting 99% on a ram lamb. We need to give a little bit there.
That's a good starting point. And you know, I wouldn't be worried about that fat depth. The only element I'd be worried about there is if I wanted to get my lambs away really, really early. He's a little bit leaner, but because that growth and muscle are so high, he will carry those lambs through, and they'll probably still grade quite well at a 2–3L, even at a light to weight, because that muscle is so high on him. But you learn, once you start looking at all of these, then you learn pretty quick what's on them.
Brilliant, thank you. Leah, before I bring you in, you can stay there, you don't have to go away. But before I bring you in, just because it's a really good point, a really good time to cover it, is just to say we've deliberately not gone through all the EBVs in detail today, because AHDB has a wealth of information for you to be able to do that yourself and go away and look at it. You can find it on the knowledge library, but this is the information that will come round to you after we finish today. There'll be an email with these links in, and the 2 manuals at the top, binary recorded RAM for terminal traits and the same for maternal traits, go through each EBV and give you a example of how to use it and a definition of what it means. And they're just a lot more useful to have in your back pocket or sat at the end of the kitchen table than us going through each one in depth today. So it was just to flag that information is there, and you can order them in hard copy as well as them being online. There's also a few other things just there that might be of use. So the Signet Data website, the RAM Compare website, all of our meetings and events can be found at the AHDB events page, and the AHDB Farm Business Review is some free one-to-one advice that's available at the moment until February. So when you get that email, please click on the link if you're needing more information. And Leah, that was just a really good place to do that. Sorry, what have we got coming in?
We do have a few questions on the accuracy value stand. The accuracy value, what does it stand for, an EBV chart? If we went onto those resources, would that be a good place to find that answer?
Yeah, so there's each, in those 2 books that are there is each EBV, what it means and an example of how to use it. And there's also an exploded EBV chart that will pull out the bits you need to look for and what they need as well. So that's all in there.
And traits like growth rate and muscle, carcass traits and growth traits, you can get quite good accuracy quite quickly because you're measuring that animal. Maternal traits, as people like David have said before, take a while to build because you need the daughters and the sisters to actually come through the system to build their accuracy properly. So on terminal sires, accuracies go quickly with the others, but don't despair. They're probably still bringing something into your flock with them.
I've got some good questions here. It might be worth bringing David and Adrian back in to have a bit of a panel. So I'll start reading them out. So there's an example here. Someone's saying they're just beginning to breed their own replacements this year. Previously, they've been all terminal breeding. If you could choose 3 key figures for this person to look at when recording, what would you recommend?
Should we go to David first on that one?
Yep, I would definitely say 8-week EBV. I'd follow that up with the prolificacy, though, you know, that has got a very low heritability. So, you know, you aren't going to see instant results there. You might end up doing it simplistically by saying, right, okay, I'm just going to save twin females. I'm a great believer in we want to identify ewes which actually produce the eggs themselves, and then you go on from there. And you know, those would be the 2 that I would most probably look at. Maternal ability, you're going to find that's going to give you limited information in your initial start.
Okay, Adrian.
Lost him.
Goodbye. You didn't want to answer that.
I mean, I'm not actually breeding any replacements. So I mean, I'm not really qualified to say what I'm looking for, really. I mean,
okay. Dewi?
Yeah, David's hit it really. The only other one really is your weight, because if you're starting from a crossbred flock of a North Country Mule or a Suffolk Cross or Texel Cross, you probably want to reduce the size of a ewe because she lives 365 days a year on the farm, so you want to make her as efficient as possible. And we know a 65 kilo ewe will produce the same as an 85 kilo ewe. So ewe weight is probably the other bit on top of David's that gives you the ability to actually drop your ewe size if you want to. If you're a believer that you want big ewes because you want to make lots of feed and you think that in 5 years' time they'll be worth more money for you, which they won't, then obviously that's not such a big deal. But generally speaking, you want an efficient ewe within the system.
Okay. Leah?
Can I,
go on, David.
Can I come back? Just a simple one. I think the person that's breeding the self-replenishing flock, they want to ask, where do they want those females to lamb? For argument's sake, if they want them to lamb early because they're trying to create an early lambing flock, then they're restricted in the breeds which they can use.
Yeah.
This might have to be the last one, Leah, depending how long the answer is.
Okay, to Dewi then. Do you know of any companies in the UK that do genetic parentage tests for multi-sire matings?
Yes, there is. There's a lab in Ayr that actually provides parentage analysis for people. So there is a lab there. They work through with SAC and I think possibly even AHDB on some of the projects. We use a laboratory in New Zealand. We use Genomes, which is ag research laboratory in New Zealand, and we send all of our DNA parentage assignments through them. And we also use that same lab to do the Welsh Hill scheme. So we're probably running good part of just short of 18,000 parentages through them every year and get really good results from them. Just to give you an example, the cost is about 15, 16 quid a sample by the time you curry them across. But equally important to the analysis of the DNA is the software that actually disentangles who belongs to who. So there'll be lots of labs out there that are not necessarily doing this service that will give you what they would classify as parentage assignment, but having software that really accurately predicts the relativeness of that is really important. So like I say, we use the lab in New Zealand, which also services a lot of New Zealand stuff. Zoetis also probably surprise some of those services as well. So there's operators out there, but there is a lab in Ayr as well that provides the service, I think.
Okay.
If anybody wants a bit more detail on that, again, go to that session on the Welsh Hill Ram scheme, because I think Janet or my colleagues will be talking about it in more detail in terms of the level of assignment that we get. And there's a few quirks that you pull out from it. By using DNA parentage, it gives you the ability to see how many lambs have come from rams in a group situation. There's quite a bit of variability there. So there's lots of stuff that happens in there that's quite useful to understand.
Okay, thank you, Dewi. I think we're at 28 minutes past now, and there's a couple of just other things I just want to mention. So I'm really sorry for those that we haven't got to your questions. We'll get you answers after the webinar, but I'm really glad there's been so much interest to send the questions in. So just to mention briefly then, so some of you might be aware in spring 2022, we have a ballot coming up on AHDB work and use of levy in the beef, lamb, cereals, oilseeds, dairy and pork sectors. You will need to register for that vote, and registration will open towards the end of this month, beginning of next month, but will essentially give you a say on how your levy is spent. So what areas of work that we do and how we fund things like today, genetics, exports work, all those things, and who is going to sit on your sector councils as well. So you'll get to see which people are going to be representing you. Please keep an eye out for it. It is coming. And if you need more information or you've got any questions or you want to talk to anybody about it, there's an email address at the bottom of that page, shipthefuture@ahdb.org.uk. We also have this graphic that you'll hopefully see a lot more of. You're not going to be able to read it all in the time it's on screen now, but essentially breaks down for every 80p per lamb we collect of levy, how we spend it. So again, whether we're spending it on work like this, whether we're spending it on export development, whether we're spending it on things like the Balanced campaign and marketing within the UK, just all those things, you can completely transparent. You can see how we're spending that money. Liz Jennifer, oh no, sorry, Leah Shanks has just sent me a message saying there's Rosa points available for this, which I didn't know, but apparently there are. So remember to get your Rosa points if you are on that. Go on, Leah.
Sorry, I'm just going to butt in. So Carrie-Anne is behind the scenes working today, and she'll send you an email after the event today. So if you are registered to gain Rosa points, just respond to her email with your membership number and those points will be awarded.
Thank you. And then just a final slide really to say this was the first session in the Sheep Breeders Conference. They are going throughout the week, running on an evening with NSA wrapping up at 12 noon on Friday. Tonight we're with Sam talking about breeding more efficient ewes. So if you think you'd be interested in that, register for it. You can register either on the NSA website or the AHDB website, or get in touch with somebody and we'll sort it out for you. Other than that, thank you very much for listening. Thank you to our speakers today. So Dewi, Adrian, David, thank you very much for your time, for taking part in this. And thank you to Leah and Carrie-Anne as well for sorting it out. You will get a feedback form after this webinar is closed. Please do fill it in. It helps us shape what we do in the future going forwards. And there will be a recording. The recording will get again sent round within about 24 hours automatically via email, and it will also go on the AHDB Beef and Lamb YouTube channel as well. But other than that, thank you very much. Thank you to the three of you that I'm looking at on the screen. We can't do this without you. And Carrie-Anne, I think we're good to close it.
No problem. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.